Good evening and welcome. Hi, my name is Tia Dozman. I am the programming chair for Michigan Humanists. And tonight is an exciting night because this is our first lecture under the Michigan Humanist organization. And we are so thrilled to co-sponsor this with GRCC and our lecturer tonight, Greg Forbes. So tonight our title is Darwin Never Saw This Coming, a Human Population Beyond 8 Billion. And a little bit before we get into the lecture topic about Michigan Humanists is we are a newer nonprofit established last summer, 2022. And central to our mission is developing a vibrant secular community throughout Michigan to allow atheists, agnostics, humanists, skeptics, and other free thinkers to share enriching experiences, offer mutual support, engage in community service, and work to end the stigma attached to being a non-believer. If this piques your interest, more information can be found at michiganhumanists.org. On the website, there are also a list of upcoming events, including some volunteer events if you're interested in promoting humanist values and secular values. This year, in addition to our normal Long Lake work day. So we do a cleanup at Yankee Springs recreation area. We also have this summer the first ever Vacation Humanist School. And it will be in Hudsonville, so a little bit of competition with all the different vacation Bible schools over the summer, and we're really excited to put on that event. So if you are interested, please look at michiganhumanist.org and check that out. And of course, there are also a multitude of other events, including Sci-Fi Book Club, Skeptics in the Pub, and Cafe Inquiries, as well as support groups for folks who are looking to leave their religion or looking for support on possibly leaving their religion. So take a look on michiganhumanist.org to find out more. All right, so a little bit about Dr. Forbes. So Dr. Forbes has been a part of the long history of Michigan Humanist organization, and I'm misspeaking a little bit there. So Michigan Humanists is a new organization, but the community has existed within West Michigan for quite a long time. This organization originally started as West Michigan Free Thought Association, transformed into Center for Inquiry Michigan, and those groups had originated back in 1997 to support the secular community within West Michigan. All right, so I apologize. I wrote this a little bit ago, so it's been a bit. Okay, so in addition to being a current professor, Dr. Forbes has also served as the director of its Science Education Center and currently serves as a course coordinator for the Human Anatomy and Physiology program. Dr. Forbes served as the educational director for Michigan Evolution Education Initiative, where he designed a statewide initiative to help teachers to efficiently teach evolution. He also served as the director of the Institute for Evolution Education, an initiative that expands the Michigan Project nationally. Dr. Forbes has won a multitude of awards for his work in promoting and protecting evolution education, including the Civil Libertarian of the Year by the Michigan ACLU, for his work in defending the integrity of science education against attempts to introduce non-scientific ideologies into the public classroom. And we all know right now, thankfully, our current administration is more liberal-leaning, but we've seen the attacks across our nation on education and really getting down to its core and causing issues throughout our country. So I'm very thankful to be in Michigan and very thankful for all the work that Dr. Forbes has done to continue protecting that from a scientific perspective. All right. More recently, Dr. Forbes has been granted the designation of Michigan Humanist Board of Directors Emeritus. So we're so grateful that he is a part of our organization. So in continuation with a mission of promoting and protecting evolution education, it is my pleasure to welcome and introduce Dr. Greg Forbes.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Tia, for that introduction. I do appreciate that. And welcome back to friends and colleagues I've been seeing at these meetings for a very long time. And we're all as young as we remember we used to be here. And new faces I see here also. So thank you very much for coming tonight for our inaugural lecture of the Michigan Humanists. And tonight we're going to talk about a topic that we've talked about in previous meetings, but one that's apropos. Had I shown up last February when we were supposed to do this, I had my first case of pneumonia in my life, so unfortunately we had to cancel this at the last minute. So we're pretending that today is Darwin Day, okay? So we're gonna roll back our calendar a little bit and just kind of pretend here and talk about Darwin a little bit today and talk about why Darwin's information, Darwin's work, Darwin's knowledge has helped us understand what maybe the prognosis is for the Earth. What's going to be happening in our ecosystems in the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? How can we take the work of a scientist from the 1830s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s and relate it to what we can anticipate happening here in the near future? And by the way, I'll tell you, I violate the rules of lecture right away. I'm a walker, okay? So they always say never walk in front of the projector, so I'm gonna do that a lot. So I wanna make sure that you folks are paying attention over here, okay? So, and how are we doing back in the cheap seats? Can we hear? Sweet. So here we are tonight talking about Darwin, and the name of the talk is pretty self-explanatory. Darwin never saw this coming. Could he ever have seen a human population that exceeded 8 billion? Could anybody in here anticipate seeing a population that exceeded 8 billion? And then what does that do for the future of the planet? Now, one of the complaints I've always had in watching science films, since I was a little kid, is you had a bunch of doom and gloom, and then at the last 10 to 15 minutes, there was always a basket of puppies and kittens and saying it's all gonna be okay, so go on. We may not have the puppies and kittens at the end of this talk. So just be prepared here for what we're doing. Because a big event happened here a month ago, a little over a month ago, on November 15th, 2022. What was the big day? 8 billion. That's when we reach 8 billion. You say, well, we can't be much above that right now. Fasten your seatbelt. We're gonna look at some numbers here as we go along. So we want to find out, so what does this 8 billion look like for the pandas, for the lions, tigers, and bears, oh my, for the rainforest, for the jungles? What will our children, what will our grandchildren see? Can we use the knowledge we've gained from Darwin's work and then anticipate what's going to happen? Get that little crystal ball. And the answer is yes, yes, and yes. But since we're pretending that today is Darwin's birthday, we want to say happy birthday, Chuck, okay? And you think, well, how old is this guy now? Well, if you do the math, 214 years old, and he's looking pretty good for 214 years old. And you think about that, that's really, really impressive. You think, well, we're still talking about him 214 years later. I was talking with my wife in my office. I have a copy of The Origin of the Species on my desk there. And we were talking about how most scholars will say that the three most important literary works on the planet are the Bible, the Quran, and The Origin. In any order you want to put them. When you look at those that have changed society, changed the way we think, it's those three texts without a doubt. So that's why we're still talking about Charles this much longer. His work was absolutely incredible. What were his contributions? His contributions that he challenged Victorian dogma. Because when he began his work, we thought that the world was static, right? That species didn't change, that the continents didn't change, that the world was static, it is as it was when it was created. Oops, okay? And so he challenged that dogma, and it took quite a long time for people to accept that. In addition to that, Darwin developed the most well-founded, the most robust, the most well-corroborated scientific theory we've ever seen. And anytime I say this, when I do my workshops for scientists, you have the physicists in the room going, that's not true, okay? And the chemists are going, that's not true. And so, yeah, it is, because no other scientific theory has more corroborating evidence from other fields of science than does evolutionary theory. Because virtually all other fields of science corroborate and substantiate evolutionary theory. Try that with atomic theory. Nope. Okay. Where does the evidence for atomic theory come from? Chemistry and physics. That's it. Okay. Plate tectonics, geology. That's it. But all fields of science corroborate evolutionary theory. It doesn't get better than that. In fact, Richard Dawkins, who many of you know the name, once said, this is as good as great science gets. What else did he do for us? Forever changed the way we look at our world and our existence. And many of you are of a background and intellectual curiosity. Well, yeah, what's the other way to think? The way a lot of the world still, in fact, does. Darwin said, here's a different lens by which I suggest we look at the world. And that's what really, really, really changed the way that we do science. And he made receding hairlines cool. Okay, so there's that, right? Okay, so way to go, okay? So here's tonight's question. Tonight's question, with what we understand about natural selection, and we're going to do a little primer here on natural selection, with what we understand about evolution, with what we understand about population dynamics, coming soon in 3 primers, is there a positive future for the Earth's ecosystems? And again, maybe no puppies and kittens tonight, okay? But we're going to see, well, why? I mean, in fact, can this be changed? Can we do something? And the answer is yes, but we have to figure out if we have the will to do that. So what we're going to look at tonight is, first thing is, are we or should we be concerned about an exploding human population? Or just call it good, and we'll let the politicians take care of it, and I'm sure they'll figure it out, okay? Or maybe we should be concerned about it. The next question is, next part rather, a quick primer on natural selection and evolution. To frame tonight's conversation of should we be concerned about the future of the ecosystems, we have to figure out what's our baseline knowledge we're going to share here, what we're talking about when we say evolution, what are we talking about when we say natural selection. And then we also have a quick primer on population biology, because that's where this whole presentation is going tonight. Based upon evolutionary theory and based on what we know about population dynamics, what's the future going to hold, right? What's our crystal ball? The next thing here is the interaction between evolution, human population, and ecosystem. Can we now put these first 3 parts together and maybe make that prognosis, make that guess of what it's going to be like? And then our epilogue and discussion. I'm going to ask you to solve the problem for us. Okay, so what are we going to do, right? Because you never want to sit back and say, well, we'll just see how it goes. One of my doctoral research projects was working on endangered sea turtles. And people used to say, why are you spending your life working on an endangered species? Don't you know they're endangered? Okay, and I said, well, the alternative is not acceptable, right? To stand by and do nothing. And that's no different for tonight's topic, right? You can be a passenger and just watch it go by, or maybe we can have some intervention, some action in this. So let's look at our first question. Are we or should we be concerned about the human population? Or will it just take care of itself? So that begs the question. What is the human population? Okay, such a learned crowd in here. What's the approximate population this morning of the US? Are we looking thousands? Obviously no. Hundreds of thousands? Tens of thousands? A million? Tens of millions? Dozens? She's down here going, faster, okay? What are you thinking? There'll be a puppy. You're gonna get a puppy. You take her home if you win this. 300 million. More. Hey, do I have? Yeah, 6. Okay. Well, let's take a look, campers. Okay, here we go. This is as of yesterday at this time. Okay, yesterday at this time we had 336 million. I have a lot of my slides today, QR codes, so you can scan it if you want to see it. And also, this comes from World Meter, which I'll show you later on. It has a live clock that's changing, kind of like the national debt clocks, okay? It's changing as you're looking at it. When I try and write the numbers down, they're changing too fast. I thought, oh, we'll just do this. So we take a look at what's happened to the US population. It's really quite significant with the change. And we'll talk about how that's happened. World population, you had to look at the title slide. What's the world population? 8 billion and change, because that was way back on November 15. So let's take a look. Here we are. As of yesterday at this time, we're up to 8 billion, 23 million. While you were sleeping, we added another 23 million since November 15th. And so you look at births today. This is from yesterday. Look at that. 254,000 births yesterday. Deaths today, 127,000. Do the math. That means 127,000 people were added to the planet yesterday. So should we be concerned? I'm thinking, okay. And is that going to have an impact upon resources and ecosystems and quality of life? I'm thinking, but what are your neighbors thinking? Let's take a look. Overpopulation and the US opinion. So we take a look at a Center for Biological Diversity. In 2013, way back, ancient history, 10 years ago, a decade ago, 60% of the population said, I think we're growing a little too fast for something that's healthy. And then in 2020, 73% said, yeah, I've been watching the papers and, what used to be papers. I've been watching, the web, and I'm thinking that is going to be a concern. A different question from a different group, from Pew, said, is population going to be a major problem? And 59% said, I don't know if it's going to be a major problem. And there were other questions that, is it going to be a problem? So, these are worded slightly differently, but it gives us the idea of what people are thinking. And clearly they're thinking, yeah, I'm a little concerned. I'm watching this. And then this one from Gallup, do you have a fear of overpopulation? Look back in 1959, 21% said life is good. Look in 1992, it increased by threefold. In 1992, people said, yeah, I'm a little concerned about this, okay? But then it's gone down in 1999 for reasons that we really can't quite explain. But clearly, even if you go to one of the lowest modern numbers here, half of the population in the United States is going, yeah, I think we should probably, keep an eye on this, okay? So let's take a look then at some basic biology here so we can continue our conversation. Let's take a look at a quick primer here on evolution, natural selection, and take a look here at what the goals are of evolutionary biology. And this is what, as an evolutionary biologist, what we look at is what do we do that's different from astronomy, that's different from anatomy, that's different from physiology. And one of the things is to understand the history of life on Earth. How cool, right? To understand where we started and where we were. Understand back in Darwin's days, none of the big dinosaurs had been discovered yet. Right? There were no T-Rex, there were no apatosaurs, there were no brachiosaurs, there were no brontosaurs. There were seashells and there were fish, but we had no idea about the paleontologic history of the Earth. But even with that, Darwin was able to piece it together and figure it out. So our goal in the evolutionary biology field is to figure out where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. And that's what we're talking about tonight, where are we going? And to understand the mechanisms, right? The mechanisms by which it works. So in the publication of The Origin, 1858, Darwin outlined the process, and he was really good, pretty much spot on. Yeah, we've cleaned things up without a doubt since 1858, but he was pretty accurate considering what our knowledge of science was like back then. So we're beginning to understand even in greater detail the mechanisms by which this works. And then our goal is to refine evolutionary theory to make it a predictive tool. Understand that we do science for one reason. The purpose that we do science is to produce theory. Scientific theory, right? Hypotheses are testable questions about the environment. Theory is a well-substantiated explanation of some aspect of the natural world that involves tested hypotheses, established facts, and laws. And you do that for one reason, to be predictive. Because if we can't predict outcomes based upon input, why are we doing science, right? We want to know. If you, in fact, aren't vaccinated from COVID and you're out, kissing everybody on the bus, chances are we know what's going to happen. If everybody does that, what's going to happen to the viral strain over time? We know it's going to mutate. We know it's going to evolve. Are we shocked by the fact that our boosters are only good for 3 months now? No, we would expect that with evolutionary theory. It's predictive, and this is what's so robust about evolutionary theory. It allows us to predict outcomes, and that's what we're discussing tonight. So let's take a look at this concept of natural selection. What I want you to leave with is natural selection. One of the things I want you to leave with is natural selection and evolution are not the same. Unfortunately, especially in K-12 education, they're used as synonyms. They're not. Think of natural selection as being the verb. It's the process that may or may not result in the outcome, the noun, evolution, right? Natural selection is the process that may or may not result in the evolution of a new form. But natural selection, as Darwin beautifully showed us, is a process by which nature, I'm concept stacking. I haven't told you what nature is. Stay tuned. The process by which nature selects those individuals, maybe you, maybe not you, maybe you, are selected for survival in a particular environment at a particular time. Because natural selection works on organisms today, not next week, right? You're selected today based upon your ability to survive today's environment, not this environment in 10 years, right? It selects for today's environment. So natural selection, we say, is a process by which nature, what the heck is nature? Now, a lot of times we conjure up nature as being a woman in a white chiffon dress who walks through the forest, butterflies landing on her shoulders, Bambi licking her heels, and it's far more brutal than that. Because nature are the combined influences of physical and biological limiting factors. Really important that we keep this concept under our belt for the rest of tonight to understand what this means. Natural selection works by nature selecting those organisms that are adapted by challenging those organisms with limiting factors, right? Is that, can you resist these limiting factors? What are limiting factors? I told you on concept stacking for you. What's a limiting factor? Limiting factors are any factor, any aspect of the environment that regulates the welfare of an organism. And we can divide them into physical, we can divide them into biological. So physical aspects of the environment, like on the left-hand side, fire, flood, drought, freezing. Would that hinder the survival of any type of organism, a plant, a bacterium? Sure. So if it turns out that, for instance, we have possums in Michigan, okay? Possums aren't supposed to be in Michigan, okay? The northern extent of possums used to be, 150 years ago, Virginia. Now look what they've done. They've come up further north because of climate change. They're able to pull it off. They couldn't do it before because they have naked ears, don't they? They have naked feet, don't they? They have a naked tail. What happens to naked during winter? Bad stuff, right? But now that those limiting factors have changed, those physical limiting factors, they can now make it further north. What about biological limiting factors? What do we have? Competition, like in the bighorns. We have predation, okay? Sharks, okay? Bacteria, fungus, any other organism that determines whether you're going to live long enough to reproduce is called a biological limiting factor. Think viruses, think bacteria, think fungus, think sharks, think grizzly bears, think cocaine bear, if you've been seeing that already on Netflix, okay? So these are all things that can affect your ability to live long enough to reproduce. So what's nature? Not a woman in a white chiffon dress. Nature is far more brutal than that. Can you survive all the things trying to kill you in nature? And if you can survive long enough to do one important thing, you're adapted. And what's that one important thing? Reproduce, right? We call it the biological imperative. You say, really? All life form, you're slapping hands back there. Did you both get it right? Okay. Sweet, okay. You already have the kids, okay? Congratulations, you're adapted to this environment. Don't do it while you're here, okay? So let's take a look here at this biological imperative. We say the goal of all life forms, whether you're a fungus, whether you're a lichen, whether you're a cow, is to live long enough to reproduce. If you can avoid all limiting factors, in order to live long enough to reproduce, you've done it. Okay, so that works out well. Let me give you a quick review here. So here's our definition of natural selection. Again, the process by which nature, right, physical and biological limiting factors, selects those organisms adapted for that environment at that time or in the future? At that time. Let me give you an example here. Goofy example on the left-hand side. So here we have birds. They're out there eating beetles. And it says here, yum, yum, green beetles are our favorite. So as we know, like in bird populations and insect populations, there's variation in the gene pool, right? Lighter colors, darker colors, etc. So can't you have a beetle population where some of them are figuratively green or orange? Well, these birds love green. So as they continue to eat the green bugs, what happens to the ratio of orange to green? It increases until eventually, how many green bugs do we have left? None, because nature, the ambassador of nature, has selected against being green. What is that bird acting on behalf of nature? Physical or biological limiting factor? It's another organism. Biological, right? Biological, exactly. Another goofy example over here, but a true example, a type of moth called pepper moths. They come in black and they come in white. And if you're on a dark tree, you're more likely to be hidden from potential predators. If you're a light-colored moth, then you're more likely to be discovered by predators. So as years go by, the presence of the genes for the white moth decrease. The presence of the genes for the black moth increase, right? Nature is selecting which of these colors is best for this environment at this time. Okay? So we've talked about natural selection, the process by which nature selects those that are adapted. What's evolution? Evolution, biological evolution, because we have stellar evolution, we have cosmic evolution, we're talking biological here, is an inheritable genetic change. It has to be a change in genes, right? You say, well, honey, we've been together for 20 years, and you've just changed. You've evolved. That's different, right? That's not evolution because there's been no genetic change there, okay? So in this case, we're talking about genetic change in a species over time. So if we take a look at, for instance, COVID, even though it's a virus, we see how it's changed in the last 36 months rather dramatically, right? We've seen a change in that. It's evolved. And here we have a little graphic that talks about where birds come from. As we all know, we've seen Jurassic Park, right? Is that actually, remember Velociraptor in Jurassic Park? That's who gave rise to today's birds, right? They're just flying dinosaurs. You go, but they're birds. Actually, no, they're classified as reptiles. Birds are classified as reptiles. I'll shock you later with that. They're just feathered reptiles. They're comfortable with that. They haven't complained at all, okay? So what's a species? I just told you that it's an inheritable genetic change in a species. What's a species? So one moonlit night, out in the pasture, we have an amorous horse who looks across the paddock and sees a good-looking donkey and says, hey, come over to my side of the paddock. They make nice, and then pretty soon you see little cigarettes light up on the other side of the paddock. And then, 4 months later, they give rise to a mule. Is that mule or that jackass fertile? No, it's sterile. So are donkeys and horses the same species? No, they're close enough where they can produce offspring, but they're sterile offspring. So we talk about species, you have to be capable of reproducing fertile or reproductive offspring. This is going to become important when we start talking about decrease in the number of species in the planet during this presentation tonight. We're also, remember, our talk tonight is what's going to happen to the world populations? What's going to happen to the populations of humans? What's going to happen to the populations of plants, animals, etc.? Well, what's a population? We talk about in biology populations being groups of individuals. We're using references here of animals because if I start talking about ferns and bryophytes and mosses and liverworts, I've lost you. If I show you things with faces, you're on board, okay? So we tend to use animals, but it's the same rules for all organisms. A population is a group of individuals of the same species, we just learned what a species is, living in the same time, in the same space, and have the potential for interbreeding. Take a look at our king penguins. The king penguins from where? Arctic or Antarctic? Antarctic, south. So we have this massive colony over here of tens of thousands of animals. Don't they have the potential to waddle across the colony and breed with another one on the other side? Yeah, so we say these are all in the same population. Take a look over here at the Grand Canyon. South rim on your left, north rim on the right. This is a home of mule deer. What if we have Bambi up here longfully looking at another mule deer over here saying, I think we should meet tonight under the moon? Is there any chance those two are ever going to get together and share genes between the populations? So we wouldn't say they're in the same population because what? They don't have the potential to exchange genes because there's a geographical barrier that's there. And so we'll see them probably speciate on their own. So last definition here for us, gene pool. The gene pool is the total diversity of genes present in a population at any given time. So we look at the DNA molecule. The DNA molecule is made up of a whole series of what are called nucleic acids, those letters they talk about, in the DNA code. And little sequences of here might be, the gene for number of chambers in your heart, one of the genes for hair color, etc. But you can only rearrange the Lego blocks that you have. You're given so many Lego blocks in the human genome. You can only rearrange them in so many different ways. Maybe your Lego set will let you build the farm set, but it's not the space shuttle set. You don't have those Lego blocks. So species can only adapt to changing environments if they have the genes or the ability to mutate those genes to allow them to change in that changing environment. Let me give you an idea why this concept is important. Here's some work done by Curtis a zillion years ago, 67 years ago, okay? 67 years ago here in Wisconsin. So we see that his study area here, he went back and looked at the literature from 1831 and saw that, and this is about a 5-county area he worked on in Wisconsin, that it was all forested in 1831, go figure. Very little unforested area at that time. Look what happened in 1882, agriculture got in there. We had fragmented habitats, very typical of what we see in Michigan, right? A couple thousand acres of corn and then a little woodlot, a couple thousand acres of corn. Look what happened by 1902. And then by 1950. So what if we had a bear population down here, a black bear population down here, another one up there? Would it be possible for those in the northeast corner to mosey through the forest and meet up with those in the southwest corner and produce offspring? Yes, because what? They're in the same population. Same area, same species, same time, they have the potential to reproduce. But now what we see are fragmented habitats. These two are no longer going to be able to interbreed. So these genes are isolated from this gene pool up here. And so we might see speciation of those. Most likely what's going to happen, can you be a bear in broccoli? No, okay? So unfortunately, we'll probably lose those. But what we're seeing on the planet, and I'll show you some more graphics, is that the ecosystems on the planet are becoming rapidly fragmented. Go to Ohio, go to Indiana, which has even more agriculture than us. You know, the two most naturally depleted states in North America, because the ecosystem doesn't even exist here anymore. There's no place for anything to live. So when we have fractioning of these populations, usually it's very difficult for these populations to survive. Okay, quick summary, you with me? We're cruising right along here, okay? Limiting factors. Limiting factors, remember, physical and biological. Nature are the combined influences of limiting factors. Limiting factors are the most important influence on natural selection and ultimately the evolution of new species. So it's all about limiting factors, limiting factors, limiting factors. Can you survive the limiting factors in your environment and live long enough to reproduce? As natural selection changes, so do population numbers and species diversity. So if limiting factors change in the environment, even a little bit, as I'll show you an example here in a minute, it can have dramatic impact upon the population number and the presence or absence of species. You know, if you look at black bear populations in Wisconsin, Wisconsin's done a lot in the last 100 years to bring a lot of the forest back. Black bears are doing pretty well right now back in Wisconsin because the habitat's been brought back. Had that not happened, we would have lost that black bear population. Therefore, as limiting factors change, so do ecosystems. And that's what we're talking about tonight. What happens as the human population changes? What happens to the natural ecosystems during that time? Part 3, what is what we've just talked about have to do with population biology and the dynamics of populations? This field of biology is called population biology. And this is part of my research work, is to figure out what happens to populations over time as limiting factors change in the environment. For instance, take a look right now, excuse me, raccoons in Michigan. What's happened to our raccoon population? Decreasing, staying the same, or exploding? It's exploding, okay? Do you know there are more raccoons per square mile in the city of Grand Rapids than in any of our rural areas? Why? Because their behavior just loves being around humans, right? You think that's going to be a limiting factor. No. How about coyotes? Do coyotes do well around humans? Sure, all right? So as limiting factors change, populations can decrease, or they can actually sometimes increase. So let's take a look here. Darwin told us that, and in The Origin, that all species are in a struggle for existence. Now, again, he had limited knowledge of biology back then, but he was spot on. What was the struggle for existence? The struggle to avoid limiting factors and find nutrients. Nutrients is what? Food, minerals, vitamins. Can't eat, can't reproduce. Can't eat, can't live. So it's a struggle for survival. You can see this at your bird feeder. We have a bird feeder, and it's like, boy, you can see the whole bird hierarchy out there, man. As soon as the pileated woodpeckers arrive, vroom, everybody else is gone, right? We can tell who's going to boogie when what species comes along. They're all struggling for the same resource, the Forbes feeder. And this happens in nature also, doesn't it? Okay? Water, right? Can't survive without water. Part of that struggle for existence is finding not only nutrients, but water, and of course shelter. You have to what? Rest. You have to feed, you have to reproduce, you have to travel, you have to breed. And when we lose that shelter, when we lose that habitat, we lose species. And space, you need space, okay? You think, well, animals don't need space. Sure they do. When you don't give them space, they interfere, they come into contact with humans, and then we have all kinds of issues. So this is that struggle for existence that Darwin articulated, 200 years ago, and he was spot on. So here's our question. How do populations grow? We're going to look at a couple different growth models, and then we're going to have you figure out, there's going to be a test, on which of these is the human population, right? Which of these population models demonstrates the human population? So what we're going to do here is we're going to look at something called a J-curve growth, also known as exponential growth. So the A there is our answer. Okay, so the answer I've already given you. Let's take a look here. Let's assume that we have an aeromile flask here, and we have bacteria that we're going to take out of that flask, and we're going to put them in a petri dish or grow them in some fashion. Here's what we need to know. We're going to assume that cells, these bacterial cells, can divide, double their population every 20 minutes. They can't do that. Yeah, they actually can. Under ideal conditions, the bacteria in your mouth can reproduce about every 20 minutes in laboratory conditions, which is why when you wake up in the morning and go, hi, hon, you goes, oh, geez, what crawled in your mouth and died? Because those bacteria reproduce hundreds and hundreds of times during the night, and they're doubling their population. Take a look here. So at 0 minute on our clock, we have 1 bacterial cell. You with me? Okay. And then at 20 minutes, because remember, they're going to double every 20 minutes. So after 20 minutes, 20 minutes, we have how many in the population? 2, right? Or 2 to the first power for all you math nerds, okay? So we have 2. But we're going to go another 20 minutes, up to 40 minutes, and what's going to happen? The 2 is going to turn into 4. 20 minutes more turns into 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1,024, 2,040. You get the idea. I can't go any higher than that. So it doubles all the time. So if we were to graph this, what would we see? If we come here to minute 0, where we have a single cell, and then we actually graph it as time passes here on the x-axis, what happens on the y-axis? The number of cells increase, and what letter does it look like? A J, right? This is why it's called a J curve. What's happening here is they're reproducing because there's no struggle for existence. There are no limiting factors. We've given them space. We've given them habitat. We've given them nutrients. We've given them food. This is bacterial Disneyland, right? Everything's great, and they're just reproducing like crazy. So let me give you another example to demonstrate this. Pond lily example. Let's assume that a farmer has a pond, or you have a pond on your property. Drone shot, okay? And then these lily pads, you notice it's clear of lily pads. And then you get a lily pad in there on day number 1. Let's assume that lily pads double their population each day. They don't. Let's just do it to keep the math easy. So let's assume lily pads double their population each day. So at the end of day number 1, how many lilies? 1. Let's use our bacteria example. Day number 2, how many lilies? 2. Day number 3, okay, we have 4 lilies. Day number 100, the pond is packed. Okay, here we go. Shh, don't say it out loud. Don't cheat your fellow students out of the experience and the joy of discovery, okay? When was the pond half full? Talk amongst yourselves. There'll be a puppy to take home if you get it. So we're doubling our populations every day. At day 100, the farmer goes out, or the person goes in and goes, geez, okay, that's a lot of lilies. I should have taken care of that back when there were fewer. So when was the pond half full? What day? 99. Right? You've been watching it out there. You've been watching it for 6 months and going, oh, those are going really slowly. And at day 99, you go, it's half full, right? I have 99 days more until it's full. No, because you weren't paying attention, right? It doubles every time. This is exponential growth, not mathematical, not 1 begets 2 begets 3 begets 4 begets 5. It's 1, 2, 4, 8, right? That's what we talked about before. Give me another example. Let's talk iguana. Let's take a look at marine iguanas, which occur on the Galapagos Islands, okay? Let's assume, and this is correct, they produce 8 offspring per year in a normal year. They can go higher or lower, but let's assume that she squeezes out 8 eggs a year. Young mature in a year. So the youngsters can reproduce after just a year, and they're going to breed outside the family, which we encourage everybody to do. Okay, they're going to breed outside the family, and then they're going to each go after a year, produce 8 offspring. So iguanas live 9 years. Okay, you're getting this in your phone? They live 9 years. How many iguanas are going to result from the original 2 iguanas? So 2 iguanas on a rock 9 years ago, and hey, I think we should make babies. She squeezes out 8 eggs, those 8 reproduce, and those 8 go outside the family to reproduce. So after 9 years, what are we going to have? Hundreds of iguanas as a result of those original 2. We're not worried about the rest. Those original 2, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions, or billions. Nobody wants to commit at this point. You've got me twice before, Forbes. I'm not falling for this again. 431 million. Look at year number 1, 2 adults, 8 young. End of the year, how many do we have? 10. At the beginning of year number 2, all 10 are going to breed outside the family, and each one are going to produce 8 offspring, right? So we have 80 young in year number 2 plus the original 10. What do we have? 90 at the end of year 2. Do the math. Yes, back in the cheap seats. There are other variables here without a doubt, to take into account here on are they all successful breeding outside the family, et cetera. But whether that male, of course, 50% of the offspring are going to be male, but they're still going to inseminate a female outside the family, and we can still count those 8 as the original parents. So we're still good on the math, okay? So is the whole world going to be taken over then by bacteria, by pond lilies and iguanas? Are the Galapagos going to sink one day under the weight of iguanas? Okay. Why or why not? Why not? Oh, thank you. Group hug. Hug the person next to you. Limiting factors. Yes, okay. Limiting factors. Because it turns out this concept of biological potential is never going to be obtained. The abiotic potential is the maximum number of offspring that an organism can produce under what kind of conditions? Ideal. Are there ever Disneyland conditions in nature? No, there are always limiting factors, aren't there? So we're not going to have iguanas of that numbers because they're going to get eaten. They're going to drown. They'll be stepped on by whatever, okay? Otherwise, we'd have some serious problems, wouldn't we? Okay? Because remember, and you have it correct, limiting factors. This is germane because we're going to talk about the human population here shortly and find out what we've been able to do in the management of our limiting factors, okay? Darwin told us here in The Origin of Species in 1859 that although some species may now be increasing more or less rapidly in numbers, that's the British English and syntax, not mine, okay, all cannot do so, for the world would not hold them. He didn't really understand the population dynamics. They had no knowledge of genetics back then, but he nailed it, right? Didn't know the mechanisms, but he had the conclusion, right? We've spent the last 200 years giving the mechanisms validity. He already had it figured out. It's like, okay, now you kids figure it out over the next 200 years. So otherwise, what would we have? Okay, yeah, this is my room in college. Okay, so yeah, if in fact there were no limiting factors, wouldn't we be walking on the exoskeletons of cockroaches everywhere? Right? Because there are going to be limiting factors, right? Otherwise, we'd have that exponential growth. So, whew, no cockroaches, no iguanas. Maybe iguanas could eat the cockroaches. Some of you know this book. This is a famous book from 1969. Paul Ehrlich from Stanford, population biologist, one of the very first population biologists. He and his wife, Anne, they didn't want to put her on the book because, after all, she was female. And even though she had a doctorate, that was not favorable, apparently, in 1969. So they only his name and made her mad, justifiably so. In his book, he said, the basic point is so simple. We have a finite planet with finite resources. Important concept, okay? In such a system, you can't have infinite population growth. He figured that out in 1969. Let's take a look at another variation on population. So in this situation, we had our bacterial example before, remember, that had this exponential growth? But at some point, if resources become limited, if we don't put more nutrients in the agar, what's going to happen? We're going to start to see the population start to slow down in its growth and eventually level off at what population can be sustained with those available resources. And if we look at the shape of that red curve, does it look like a letter J or a letter S? Squeeze your eyes if you have to. Letter S, okay? So this is called an S curve, and this shows it's called logistical increase. This means that the population has reached what? Carrying capacity. So unless the limiting factors decrease, that population theoretically isn't going to get any larger. Again, now think human population, and we'll come back and address that. Darwin also said an overproduction of individuals, right, produce too many babies, with limited resources creates a struggle for existence, in which some organisms will succeed, but most will not. You know, we have in our pond in our property a little mallard duck last year that produced 12 babies, and you wonder after 48 hours how many babies were left. I sat out there with my chair. I was so excited. I sat in my little chair and watched them swimming around, and then I watched the barred owl come down and poof, nail a couple of them. And then the red-shouldered hawk, poof, nail a couple more of them. And then had I wiped the tears from my eyes and continued to look, the bullfrogs would have nailed some. The catfish, and how many is she going to finish with? But she only needs how many at some time during her life? How many successes? 2 to replace her and her partner, right? So most are not going to survive. Let's take a look here. Here's another population curve, aphids in Michigan. We're going to start seeing aphids here in about another month, okay, as the plants begin to green up. We're not going to see any aphids before then because there's nothing for them to eat. So we're going to see all the way through midsummer, the aphid population is just going to go gangbusters. And then, boom, it's going to crash. Why? Aphids gave up. They weren't interested in life anymore. Aphid life may be boring, but that's not why. What happened? No more resources, right? They've given up. The resources aren't sufficient. They've run out of nice green leaves by that point, and then we see this big plummet. This is actually called a bell-shaped curve. It's usually not a precipitous decline like that. It's a little more rounded. So that's called a bell-shaped curve. We're going to review these in a second. But let me give you an example. Let's take you back. This is where we learned this, to Arizona. So we're going to take you to, here's Grand Canyon, North Rim. Just north of the Grand Canyon is Kaibab National Forest, actually one of our first national forests. And Teddy Roosevelt was on board back then. He thought, I want to sell this idea of national forests as being a great place where people can go hunting, because it was big back in the day. You know, hunting was popular. I can sell this whole concept of federal lands if people can go there and do what most people do outdoors, which is hunt. So they came up with this idea. Let's get rid of all the predators. Let's get rid of the bald eagles. Let's get rid of the golden eagles. Let's get rid of black bears. Let's get rid of the plains wolf. Let's get rid of the mountain lions. Let's get rid of the bobcats. Let's get rid of the coyotes. And that's what our federal hunters did in earnest for 5 years. And then they started this in 1905. Look what happened to the deer population. Went crazy. And you see photographs like this where we have, this actually happens to be the wolves that they were shooting out at the time. You can see old photographs of people with stacks of 20, 30 deer in the back of their early pickup trucks because there was no limit, and people loved this idea of predator management. But the party was soon to be over, because once we removed all those predators, what happened to the number of deer? They went up. And then what happened here? Starvation. They overgrazed the habitat. We're now we're 100 years out from that, and the Kaibab Plateau hasn't even regenerated yet from the overgrazing damage. So that's where we learned, ooh, maybe predator management, not a good idea. One last one for us. We see populations usually respond, and again, this could happen for plants also, but we're using animals. Populations can respond to the population numbers of others. Here in Michigan, we have snowshoe bunnies, snowshoe hares. We also have bobcats. This happens to be a lynx. This would be up in Canada. But look down here at the population in blue of the snowshoe hare. Then notice that when the snowshoe hare population increases, there's a lag period, but what happens to the population of lynxes afterwards? They increase correspondingly until eventually they feed on so many snowshoe hares that what happens to the snowshoe hare population? It decreases. Correspondingly, what's going to happen to lynx and bobcat population? It's going to decrease, right? So these are responding in relation to each other. So every organism on the planet and every ecosystem has an effect on all of the other members of that ecosystem. Again, think of that in the human context and how we fit into the Earth's ecosystems. So here's your question. What's happening with the human population? Is the human population a J curve like we saw with the bacteria? Is it an S curve where eventually we level out once we reach carrying capacity? Or is it a bell curve, or is it cyclical? Okay, so there's your question. Figure that out, consult. Are we a J population growth curve right now in humans? Are we an S curve? We reach our carrying capacity and we're good. Okay, we're gonna hum along. Or have we already crashed in our population? Or do we just going up and down, up and down, up and down? There'll be a vote later. What's the answer? J curve. J curve. We are a J curve. How and why? What have we removed almost entirely? Our limiting factors, right? Our limiting factors. We control disease. We grow crops. We've removed the predators. Take a look here. Here's the human population. First agriculture, about primitive, about 10,000 years ago. Mechanized agriculture happened right after the plague because so many people died during the plague, it kind of spawned this mechanization. Once we got mechanization of agriculture, look what happened to our population. And you say, well, you should show us the top up there. No, because that's 8 billion at the top, isn't it? We're there. Hold for coming attractions. You know, what's it going to be in 5, 10 years? Some of you know Thomas Malthus, it's somebody you read in philosophy. It's a book you read in math majors. We'd read it in biology. He was our first really mathematical population biologist. And what Malthus said, and this is a book, by the way, that Darwin studied and took with him on the voyage of the Beagle. The power of a population is indefinitely greater. The power of population is indefinitely greater than the power in the earth to produce subsistence for man. He was talking about humans. Basically, what's he saying? Humans can exceed the what? Carrying capacity. We didn't have those names back then, but Malthus nailed it. Take a look here at what's happening to the world population. When we reduce or eliminate most of our limiting factors, look at in 1804. We all remember 1804, right? Okay. 1804, we reached the first billion people on the planet. Look what happened by 1927, just 18 years later, 2 billion. 1960, 3 billion. 1974, look at the numbers, but also look at how long passed between each of these markers, right? 123 years to get to the second billion, but it only took 33 years to get to the third billion. Only took 14 years to get to the 14th billion. Exponential population growth. One doesn't beget two. 2 becomes 4, becomes 8, becomes 16, becomes 32, becomes 64, becomes 128. So what is the world population net increase? You ready? Tighten your seatbelt. Every second, in the time you've been looking at this slide, we've already had a net increase of about 10 people on the planet. Every minute, 165. This is net increase, taking into account deaths. Hour, 9,500. Day, 228,000. A week, 1,800,000. A month, 7 million. A year, more than 85 million. Whoa. Because we're starting to what? Eliminate and control our limiting factors. So in my life, put this in perspective, sounds like a George Harrison song. In my life, the world population has grown from 2.7 when I was a youngin', and now it's at 8 billion in my lifetime. The world population has increased 3-fold in my lifetime. You've been to Woodland Mall during Christmas, right? This is your future, okay? And the world population just during my teaching career has increased 2-fold. The Ehrlichs, Paul and Ann Ehrlich, they were criticized for focusing their book on the total numbers of humans on the planet rather than the consumption by those humans. They said, it's not about how many humans we have on the planet, it's about the consumption by those different humans. And you say, well, that sounds pretty good. In fact, Ann and Paul Ehrlich wanted to call their book Population, Resources, and Environment. It was the publisher that said, no, we need something more dramatic. We need to scare people. We need to do this. And the Ehrlichs actually, in their first version of this, 1969, thought that the world couldn't support, you ready for this drum roll, more than 3.5 billion people. My God, were they wrong. Because they couldn't have anticipated what we've done in agriculture, what we've done in disease control, what we've done in longevity. And so they came back in 1980, I'm forgetting, and then said, well, okay, we're going to change that. It's no more than 9 billion for sure this time. But again, maybe we'll keep raising that. We don't know. But take a look here. What's the world population by region, including US projections? The red line is where we are today, okay? And we can take a look that if we look at the population, we can see here in this bluish color, Asia has the biggest portion of the population on the planet right now, followed by Africa. Oceania, right, the islands, that tiny little brown line at the top. Look at North America and Europe. Just not a major contribution to population at this point. But those that are growing the fastest are what, developed countries or lesser developed countries? Lesser developed countries. Take a look here at population trends by age group. So if we look down here, here's where we are at the red line. We're looking at this color here. These are the youngsters, 15 and under. Look at this group, 15 to 64. Most of this group right here is still reproducing, right? They're still a reproductive age. So when you look at this world population, it's a young population, which means they're still in a reproductive cycle. Take a look at this. You say, well, I keep reading in the newspaper that actually reproductive rates are coming down. And that's true. Look at the purple line. The purple line shows that in the 1950s, the number of babies produced per person was decreasing. But yet, look at the teal or the green color. We still see that the population is increasing because it's still exponential population growth from those people that are here. So what's the interaction between human population and ecosystems? That's our conversation tonight, is that, Darwin told us about natural selection. He told us about evolution. He told us about the struggle for existence. Since then, we've learned of new concepts like limiting factors, which he knew existed. He just didn't have a name for them and didn't have a lot of evidence for them. But we know that population numbers are controlled by the ability of that population to struggle against their resistance, which is going to be limiting factors. So what have we done in the human population? We're really, really good at controlling our environment. The only two other animals that are as good as we are at modifying their environment, believe it or not, are elephants and beavers, right? I mean, think what beavers can do here in Michigan to modify environments. They can turn a forest into a lake, can't they? Elephants push down entire forests. We're the three species on the planet that modify our environments beyond all recognition. And so that can result in what? Threatened species. Again, we're talking animals here, but this could be the same for plants also. We tend to monitor animal populations because they're at the top of the food chain. And if those numbers are decreasing, what's happening to everybody else below them? The same thing, right? So they're our canary in the coal mine, if you would. So threatened species are species that are in decline. All these are threatened species, right? Think polar bear, think lynx, think the woods of bison, manatees, etc. They could become endangered if there's a change in limiting factors. So they're holding their own, reproduction barely outpacing the death rate, but it's a precarious situation. They're handling limiting factors now. What about endangered? Endangered species, the key deer, the leopards, the black-footed ferret, green sea turtles, etc., their reproductive rate is now less than their mortality rate. So natality is less than mortality. If things don't change dramatically and rapidly, we're going to lose them, and they become biologically extinct. The stellar sea cow, the Tasmanian wolf, the dodo bird, velociraptor, don't we mourn the loss of them, okay? Take care of the neighborhood cats, okay? And then, like the moas from New Zealand. These are all gone. We say that you're biologically extinct if we haven't seen you anywhere on the planet in 50 years, and the list goes on. So we judge the impact of the human population on ecosystems by the numbers of threatened, endangered, and extinct species. It's a wonderful measurement to use, okay? So pay attention. What's the number one reason that we see a decline in population for animals and for plants? Habitat destruction. Remember the struggle for existence? Where do you get your nutrients? Where do you get your water? Where do you get your space? Where do you get your nesting? Where do you get your hibernation areas? In natural environments. And when we modify those natural environments, and I love this picture in Australia, here's a koala just kind of saying, well, where'd my eucalyptus forest go? What am I going to do now, right? And so we see that habitat destruction, there's a long list. And some of you have seen a presentation I've done on endangered species. We could go on all night about the reasons species become endangered, but it all comes down to the most important, which is habitat destruction. Take a look at this. The organization that monitors this on the planet is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And they produced originally something called the Red Data Book. It was actually a 3-ring binder. It was red. And every year I would get in the mail, the worst mailing I would get, this thing we used to have called the mail. We'd send paper through the mail. And you'd get this thing and there'd be a little list. It said, please remove the following pages from last year's Red Data Book. Those were the species that were now extinct. And then every year it was a bigger and bigger stack of pages you would have to add to the book. And this is such a sobering thing, taking these pages out and saying, biologically extinct, gone forever. New pages in here. Look at the numbers. Right now on the planet, I pulled this off their website a couple days ago. 41% of, so if we look at here, more than 42,000 species are listed as critically endangered. 41% of all amphibians. You don't want to be a fraud, okay? Mammals, 27%. 1 in 4 mammals on the planet is currently threatened with extinction. And you can look at conifers, birds, etc. And so it's not looking good. How come? Because habitat destruction, because of competition with humans, hasn't been successful on their end. Take a look at this. This is called the Living Planet Index. What they do, this group, since 1970, is when they started this, looks at 5,200 species of animals, of plants, and they use those as their indicators for how populations are doing. And this is a total of 32,000 populations. Remember we talked about populations? So they're looking at not only species changes, but populations within those species. So they've been monitoring now for 50 years, okay, half a century, 5,200 species and 32,000 populations, and look what's happening over time, okay? To those that now we say here, the average decline monitored since 1970. So here's where they began. 100% of the organisms were there because that was their base. And then what's happened to percentage decrease over time? What's happened to the population? It's not a very good trend. What's happening? That struggle for existence, we're removing those resources. We're in competition with the other organisms on the planet. Okay? And so a lot of these populations are what we call minimal viable population. We get to a point where populations are so small, like with blue whales, we may be there with blue whales, is that there's nothing we can do because there aren't enough blue whales anymore to reproduce. Take a look here. Here's a study done with bighorn sheep. And so if you look at when we look at the population numbers right here, the population, percent of population persisting over here over time. We look at the analysis down here. Studies of bighorn sheep indicate that only populations with at least 100 individuals will persist for 50 years or more. So if you have 100 organisms in your population of bighorn sheep, you're probably going to continue to survive on this planet. That's their minimum, okay, viable population. Grizzly bears in North America, we were below MVP for probably 40 years, and we thought grizzly bears aren't going to survive in the lower 48. We're there now possibly with polar bears. We're there with most of the whale species. Even if we stop harvesting, even if we stop what we're doing, it doesn't matter. The cows left the barn because they're below the critical level required to maintain that population. And why? Because we compete for those resources in those spaces. Take a look here at the Earth's surface by type. So this is where to say, okay, let's look at the Earth. What percentage of the Earth is habitable by humans? Not by other organisms, by humans, because that's where the competition comes. 71% of the Earth is ocean. So we can't live there unless you watch Kevin Costner Waterworld. That's probably out of the cards, okay? We're not going to live on a glacier. So we have 21% of the world's surface, the Earth's surface, is habitable by humans. That's not a bunch, right? Okay? That's 10.6 billion hectares. So this is a pie chart that shows you where we could live and supply our agriculture, etc. Let's take a look at 10,000 years ago. We're just now looking at the habitable portion of the planet. We're not looking at the ocean anymore. Where can humans live? 10,000 years ago, look at that. 42% of the planet was grassland. Okay, over here, 57% was forest. 10,000 years ago. What happened by the year 1700? By the year 1700, grasslands were at 38%, forests were at 52% because what? We started converting these to grazing areas, and we started harvesting the forest and putting in crops, and we started building urban areas. But those were back in the halcyon days of the 1700s. Let's take you up to 2018. Now look. What's happened to forests? We're down to 38%. What's happened to natural grasslands? 14%. Look what happened to grazing. Look what happened to crops. Look what happened to urban areas. So when we're looking at habitable areas for the wildlife species, for the plants, competition is clearly in our favor. Look at the before and the after. There's the first slide. This is what the habitable portions of the planet looked like 10,000 years ago. Here we are in 2018. So basically, all of the other species in the planet are now basically being squished into this portion right here, whereas before they had a much greater area. And what happens here, and this is a little busy right here, the top chart here shows us as agriculture increases, we see a corresponding decrease in mammal populations. Again, we tend to look at mammal populations because mammals, the 4,000 species of mammals, tend to be pretty high in the food chain. And if grizzly bears are disappearing, we know that something below them are disappearing. If whales are disappearing, so it's a good indicator species, as we call them. So we can see, as we convert natural habitat to agriculture, what happens to the corresponding populations of mammals? Because again, it's that struggle for existence, and we're winning, okay? We're winning. So What limiting factor has the greatest impact upon the Earth's ecosystems? Well, the answer here is the human population. You thought I was going to say habitat. Well, it is, but the human population is responsible for what? Destroying the habitat, as you can see in those previous slides. No species has ever competed with humans and won. Any species on this planet that's ever competed with us for resources, what do we do to that species? We wipe them out. Here you have wolves. This is in Alaska. Alaska still has a wolf bounty. Hard to believe in this day and age. We have animal bounties in most states, believe it or not, okay? So if you compete with us for resources, we're gonna take you out. So what's gonna happen over the long term? If our population continues in a J curve, in exponential growth, if we continue to modify habitats, what's the long-term prognosis? We're currently using up renewable resources 1.7 times faster than they're being renewed. So what this Earth represents with the blue, we've already used up all of the resources on the planet that could have sustained our current population growth, but we now have gone past that. We're now basically going through a second planet of resources. Right now, we're using resources almost twice as fast, like 1.7, as they're being regenerated. The forests aren't going back as fast as they should, as we want them to. The fish aren't reproducing in the ocean. So in order to continue at this rate, we'll need to now find another Earth by the year 2050, just to keep up with the resource rate that we're using right now. You go, well, that's why we're going to Mars. No, it doesn't work that way, right? That's not gonna work. Remember the Ehrlichs were criticized because they said, you're looking at population numbers rather than resource consumption by those individuals. And that's true, because who's the biggest resource hog on the planet? We are. Take a look. The USA, number of Earths required by the year 2050 if we continue to use our renewable resources at today's rate. By 2050, for just supply the US consumption, assuming there's nobody else on the planet, just to continue our consumption of resources on the planet, we need to find 5 more Earths by 2050. So you have your assignment for this weekend, okay? How about the UK? Oh, they're also using resources beyond their capacity, but they're only gonna need 2.8 Earths. Look down at the bottom in India and Nigeria. Nigeria's good, okay? They're in balance with their resources. You say, well, Nigeria's gonna be here and they're gonna disappear. No, because we're using what? Worldwide resources. And so the omen for ecosystems on the planet at this type of rate of use isn't very good, or for wildlife populations. So when we started this talk, I know that you all did your QR scan, and said, what was the population? I actually cheated. This is from 4 o'clock this afternoon. I did it ahead of time. So at 4 o'clock this afternoon, the world population was 8,023,000,000. 1 hour later, I went back on there and said, what is it now? Okay, so in 1 hour, what happened? We added 10,000 people. In the time that you've been in here tonight, because I've started talking about 56 minutes ago, we've added to the planet 10,000 people while you weren't looking, while you were doing this instead of doing it. 10,000 people. So could Darwin have seen this coming? Could Darwin, whoops, that's probably bad. Could Darwin have possibly assumed that a human population could continue to grow with exponential growth? No. In fact, he made that point. I've shown you 2 points he made in his origin. Because you can't keep doing this. Humans can't do it. Wildlife can't do it. He could have never guessed that here we are 2 centuries later, and we're still in a J growth curve. Could he ever believe that humans could control their environment to the level that we control it? Remember, think what agriculture was like in the 1850s that Darwin was comparing this to, right? Think about disease control. Both were almost non-existent. He could have never imagined our ability to control our limiting factors. He could have never guessed that we would also have such an impact upon living organisms on the planet. The exponential loss of Earth species and ecosystems as a result of single species, us. There's no way he would have anticipated this. Darwin said that although some species may now be increasing more or less rapidly in numbers, all cannot do so, for the world would not hold them. He anticipated what could happen. He never anticipated it would happen. So what's the greatest threat to natural resources on our planet? Apathy, right? As long as we're willing to say this is terrible and not try and take any action, I've clearly outlined tonight what the result is going to be. No wiggle room there unless we change, because we're still on an exponential growth curve. We keep controlling our environment better and better all the time. I teach anatomy physiology, and I only half joke with my students and say, think what would happen in the human population if tomorrow you pick up the paper and it says, we have now discovered the cure for cancer. I say, I want that to happen for my family and my friends, but not for yours. Okay? Think if we remove that number one limiting factor on our population, what would happen there? I'm not advocating that we don't treat cancer patients, understand. I'm just saying understand what's involved every time we remove another limiting factor. Einstein said the world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those that watch them without doing anything, similar to Dante's hell, right? A book I would like to suggest you read if you don't know about Aldo Leopold. He was our first wildlife biologist, if you will, in North America, and basically kind of started the field of wildlife biology. And he grew up here in Arizona, in the White Mountains, and in this mountain here, which is called Bull Mountain because it looks like a bull, se dice en español escaldilla, or also called Grizzly Mountain. And he had never been up there as a boy. He looked at the mountain because he could see it in the distance, and rumor was there was one grizzly still surviving on this mountain. And he thought, that's just so cool. Every time you look at the mountain, you know that up there, there's still a grizzly bear remaining and living up there. And he tells the story in Sand County Almanac where he went to the local hardware store in his dirt road town in Arizona, and propped up in front of the hardware store was a dead grizzly bear. And you could pay $25 and have your picture taken with it. A government hunter went up there and killed the last grizzly bear. And he said the majesty of this mountain had just been taken away. Because to look up there and say, someday I can go up there, someday I can see that grizzly bear, the aura, the mystique was now gone. Wouldn't it be nice to know that although you may never actually see a blue whale in the wild, that they're there and you may have the opportunity? Wouldn't it be nice to know that there are still lions in Africa that should you choose, you can go and see them? Do you want to live on a planet where such species don't exist anymore? Maybe we'll come up with a great way of making food and clean water, and if we don't kill each other, we'll be fine without the passenger pigeon. How many of you mourn the loss of the passenger pigeon? None of you grew up with the passenger pigeon. You go, my life is fine without the passenger pigeon. And a lot of people think this about nature. I live in the city. I don't really interact with nature, so I'm okay, grizzly bear or not. So this quote has been attributed to many different people over generations. We don't really know where this thought came from, but it comes from a lot of different people's writings, but I like the message. The message says that we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, right? This have dominion over nature stuff, okay? We borrow it from our children. Isn't that a very different attitude, right? And we have grandchildren, I look at them and every day, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, my generation didn't do it. I hope your generation does a better job. Thank you for listening. No puppies, no kittens. And T will tell me if we have a few minutes left. If we do, some things for you to consider is that, have we passed the Earth's carrying capacity, or will we keep moving it, right? That Ehrlich thought it was 3.5 million. Then he thought it was, 9 billion. Maybe we just keep better at moving that, right? And maybe we can do that indefinitely. Maybe science will save us continuously. How do you feel about that? Think about it. Can we get to zero or negative population growth? Because remember, that just means that for every person that dies, it's replaced by one more, not two, not three, not four, or five. Then we wouldn't go any higher than we are right now. Are we willing to accept cataclysmic levels of species loss? Are we okay with the destruction of ecosystems like we have seen previously. Can our ecosystems survive another 50 years? Are we going to find another habitable planet in order to get to? And when asked this question many times, and I'll just point this up there so you don't have to bother asking the question, and there's, if you want to see more lectures, this, by the way, tonight's lecture will be posted on YouTube, and Tia will have the link for it, so it'll be available for you. And you can link to all of my public lectures. But people say, what we need is a good war. I mean, we just need a good war periodically. Well, that's an insane suggestion to begin with, but let's look at the data, okay? Our best estimate of everybody who's died in every human conflict on the planet in the 20th century is about 108 million. For all wars, 150 million to maybe 1 billion, even before. And we're guessing, right, because there are no records. But let's just say it's a 1 billion. But our current net increase is 85 million per year. We did have to have a major war pretty much every other year in order to do everything. So it's just not an option, is it?